We thought we'd create this video on how to fill out the I-129F form. The I-129F can be incredibly confusing, and we had to search through various videos, tutorials, guides to ensure that we were filling out this form correctly and accurately, so we wanted to share how to fill out this form and all the tips and tricks that we picked up along the way. The form can be downloaded on the USCIS website. Just make sure that you are downloading and filling in the most recent, up-to-date version. The website is overwhelming with information, but it shows everything you need for the I-129F and K-1 visa application as a whole, such as instructions for the form, where to file, the cost, checklist for the application, etc. Hence why we thought we'd create this video as a resource if you're attempting to fill in this form by yourself. As a note, the I-129F form is just a part of applying for the K-1 visa, and there are additional documents that you'll need to assemble and send in. But right now, we wanted to focus on filling out this form in depth, correctly, and accurately. So here are some useful tips about the form. This form is primarily based for the petitioner, i.e., the American who is applying for their fiancé to come live in the United States. So USCIS recognizes it is the US citizen who is applying and filling it out, even though details of both the American and the foreign citizen or the beneficiary will have to be filled out. This form can only be mailed into USCIS, and there is no online version of the form. Only use black ink when filling out the form, but you can either type or fill it out by hand. If you fill it out by hand, do not use correction tape if you make an error, and do not use highlighters on the form, as USCIS will actually scan every page of your form into their electronic database system. In addition, the form also needs to be printed out single-sided on A4 US letter 8.5 by 11 size paper. Do not staple this form together. Again, as it's scanned, USCIS prefers loose pages rather than anything stapled or bound together. We highly recommend printing out this form and filling it in by hand. The form itself has an encryption on it, and sometimes you can't fill out certain fields or the form will lock you out. Should you wish, you can also type out as much as you can and then fill out the rest by hand too. Question 53 is probably the most important aspect of the form. If you do not answer yes, your form automatically doesn't meet the eligibility requirements. Remember to sign all additional pages that you use to fill out this form. We'll walk through step by step how to fill out this form. As a background, neither of us have ever been married before, nor do we have any children. Your case may be different, and some answers may therefore be different. So let's get started filling out the I-129F form. Always check in the top right-hand corner that the I-129F is the latest version and hasn't expired. This top box here is just for USCIS only, so you can skip this entire box here. So now we get started with Part 1. Part 1 is information about you. You meaning the petitioner or the American. As I am born in the United States, I do not have this alien registration number or this A number here, so we put NA. As you'll see as we're filling out this form, we put NA in every single box to make sure that USCIS knows that we did not skip any boxes or leave anything unattended to. So now we're going to put NA. For number 2, USCIS online account number, we do not have any, so again we put NA. I do have a US Social Security number, so in number 3 I will add that US Social Security number here. Now number 4, we just want to check off this box here that says the fiancé K-1 visa. Number 5 is not applicable as we did not select the K-3 visa. Now I'm going to start filling out my details as the American. So what it wants in 6A, B, and C is my full name. My last name, my first name, and I do not have a middle name. Now if I scroll up here, this is a section that says, do I have any other names that I use, or do I have any other aliases or maiden names or nicknames? In my case, I'm going to put NA for this entire section, 7A, B, and C. Now if I scroll down here, USCIS is looking for my mailing address. So I'm going to put my name in 8A, and then in 8B through 8I, I'm just going to put my address. So my address is my street number. I'm going to put apartment 3A. I'm going to say I live in New York. There's a drop down for the state, so I'm going to select my state. I'm going to add my zip code in. In the US, we do not have provinces or postal codes, so I'm going to leave that as NA and NA. And then my country is going to be United States of America. Now in 8J, it wants to know if my current mailing address is the same as the physical address with which I reside in. I'm going to put yes in my case because I live in the same place that I'm going to receive mail. If you answer no, you have to continue on and fill in 9A through 9H as your secondary address or your physical address. In my case, we just put it in anyway. So in 9A through 9H, I put in my current address. For this whole section with the physical addresses, what USCIS is looking for is physical addresses for the last 5 years, whether inside or outside the United States. It wants you to start filling out your most current address first and then to go back through history. So this is my current address here, so I put in all the same details I did above, except in 10A and 10B, I put in the date in which I live. I started living there in 2021, and I'm currently still living there, so on 10B, I put until present. This is going to be a little confusing for people overseas, but just remember to put in your date, all the dates, in US form, which is month, day, and year. Now I'm going to go back through time and write the physical address number 2 where I lived before this address. So before that, I lived in Orlando, Florida, so I'm going to write this address over here. And then again, in 12A and 12B, I'm going to put the date that I started living in and the date in which I finished. If you have more addresses than this, there's going to be a section at the very end that I'm going to go through, which is called Part 8, Additional Information. This just allows you to fill in any additional information in which you don't have space for in the original form. Now we're going to move on to your employment history. Again, this is my employment history as the American. It wants the employment history for the last 5 years, whether inside or outside the United States. And it wants, again, for me to start with the most current employer first. So now I'm going to go to employer number 1. I'm going to write my current employer and the address of this employer over here. Then in number 15, it wants to know my occupation, so I'm going to put digital marketing. For 16A and 16B, it wants to know my employment start date and my employment end date. As I'm currently working at this employer, I'm just going to write present. Now I have to go back in time again and say who was my employer before this one. So in my case, I did not have an employer, so I'm just going to put NA across all these boxes here. This may be different for you. You may have had previous employers in the last 5 years, so just make sure to fill out these details here. And again, use Part 8, additional information, if you have more employers than that. I'm going to keep going and scrolling down here. This question 20A and 20B is just the employment start and end date that's connected to employer number 2. So it's just a continuation. Now, this is other information about me as the petitioner. So for gender, I'm going to mark female. For date of birth, number 22, I'm just going to put my month, day, and year of birth. For 23, it wants to know my current marital status, so I'm going to put single. For 24, it wants to know the city or town in which I was born, so I'm going to put Orlando. Then it wants to know the state that I was born, I say Florida. And for 26, it wants to know the country I was born, so I say United States. This next section is the continuation of section 1, which is information about my parents. So you write your first parent's information here. I started with my mom, and so I'm going to put my mom's last name, her first name, and her middle name. For number 28, I'm going to put my mom's date of birth, her gender, and for number 30, I'm going to put her country of birth. She was born in the United States of America. Now for 31A and B, it's actually looking for the city and the country which your mom currently resides. So my mom currently resides in Orlando, Florida, and she resides in the United States of America. Now if I scroll back up here, so now I'm going to start with my second parent's information, in this case my dad. So I'm going to put my dad's last name in 32A. In 32B, I'm going to put his first name, and in 32C, I'm going to put his middle name. In my case, he does not have a middle name. I'm going to add his date of birth here. I'm going to give him a gender in 34. And then in 35, I'm going to indicate his country of birth, the country in which he was born. Again, for 36A and B, I'm going to put where he resides. So he currently resides in Vancouver and Canada. 37 is now continuation of questions for you, the petitioner. So 37 is, have you ever been previously married? In my case, I'm going to put no. If you answered yes, then you can continue to write in the information of your spouse and the date the marriage ended. So now this asks for your citizenship information. So I am a U.S. citizen through birth in the United States. So I am going to select this box 40A. This might be different for you in your application. Now if I go to 41, I have the question of, have you obtained a certificate of naturalization or citizenship in my name? In my case, I haven't. If you have, then you indicate yes, and then you start filling out numbers 42A through C, which is here when I scroll down. I do not have a certificate number or place of issuance, so again, we just continue to put NA on every single form to show USCIS that we are acknowledging that this is a field that we do not currently have. Now we're going to move on to question number 43. Have you ever filled form I-129F for any other beneficiary? In my case, I have not. If you have, then you're going to go in and fill in questions 44 through 46. For 47, USCIS wants to know what action was taken on the form I-129F that you've previously applied for, if applicable. So again, we put NA or not applicable. For 48, USCIS wants to know if we have any children under 18 years of age. I do not have any children under 18 years of age, so I'm going to put no. If you put yes, then you should answer in box 49A and 49B the age of your child or children. And if you have any more than this, you can always use Part 8 additional information that, again, I'm going to show you at the end. The next question it wants to know for question 50 is it wants me to provide all the US states and foreign countries in which I have resided since my 18th birthday. So for me, this was a lot, so I needed to add a lot of additional information, but I started off with the most recent one, which is New York, and the country is United States of America. If I scroll up to the top here, it will say residence 2. So it gives me 2 boxes, and then I can always add additional ones in Part 8. So my second residence before New York was Florida, and the country is United States of America. Now we've moved on to Part 2. Part 2 is information about my beneficiary or my fiancé. So my beneficiary, I'm going to write his last name, his first name, and his middle name in box 1A, B, and C. If he has an A number, I'm going to add that in here. He does not, so I'm going to put an A. Then it wants to know if he has a U.S. Social Security number. He actually has lived in the United States before, so he does have one, but for the sake of this form and this video, we're just going to write NA. Then it wants to know my fiancé's date of birth, so I'm going to add that in here. It wants to know his gender in question number 5. In question number 6, it wants his marital status. He is currently single, so I'm going to mark that down here. And then for 7, it wants to know his city of birth, 8 is his country of birth, and then 9 is his corresponding nationality or country of citizenship. Now it wants to know any other names that he goes by or that he uses. So we're going to add that in through 10A, B, and C. In his case, he does not have any other names or aliases or maiden names that he used. I'm going to keep scrolling here to the mailing address of my beneficiary. So my beneficiary is from London in the UK, and so I'm going to add in his name. I'm going to add in the street address in London, his city. For state, I'm going to put NA because in London they do not have states, but I'm going to add in the province and the postal code and country being United Kingdom. If I keep scrolling down here, it now wants the address history of my beneficiary for the last 5 years, whether inside or outside the United States. Again, it wants us to start with the beneficiary's current address and then work backwards through time. If you need additional information, you can again attach additional sheets to Part A, additional information. So I'm going to write his current address here in question 12A through 12H. And for 13A and 13B, I'm going to add the date in which he was living at this address. So I'm going to state that he started living there in 1993 and that he is presently still there, so he does not have any other address. If I scroll up to the top here, the beneficiary's physical address too, as I said, he's lived in the same place his entire life, so we can just put NA throughout all these boxes here and skip that. If you need to fill it out, again, you can use Part 8 for additional information. Now we're going to do the same thing for my beneficiary's employment history. We want to do the employment history for my fiancé for the last 5 years, whether inside or outside the United States, and starting with the current employment first. So he currently works at this company. I'm going to put the address of his current employer here. I'm going to say what his occupation is within this company. That's number 18. And then for 19, it wants his employment start date at this company. And because he's currently working there, 19B, I'm just going to write present. So now I'm going to continue with my beneficiary's second employer. So this is his employer before his current one. So I'm going to write in the name of the company of his employer, and then in question 21A through H, I'm going to add the address of that employer. Again, for number 22, it wants to know what was my beneficiary's occupation within this company, and then it wants to know the employment start date and end date in 23A and B. Now, if I keep scrolling down, it wants to know information about my beneficiary's parents. So in 24A, I'm going to start by writing down my beneficiary's father, and I'm going to add his information here. And then for date of birth, I'm just going to write his dad's date of birth here in 25. I'm going to give his gender. So in 26, I'm going to say he's male. In 27, it wants to know my fiance's father's country of birth. And then for 28A and B, it wants to know where he currently resides. So my fiance's father currently resides in London, United Kingdom. I'm going to do the same thing for his mother. So for parent two's information, I'm going to add his mother's information in, which is her first name, her last name, her date of birth for question number 30, her gender, and then again for 32, it wants to know the country in which she was born, and for 33A and B, it wants to know the city and country where she currently resides. Now, if I keep scrolling down, question number 34 wants to know if my beneficiary has ever previously been married. In our case, he has not been married. Neither of us have ever been married. If you answer yes to question number 34, you can add in information of the previous spouse here, as well as the date the marriage ended. For question number 37, the form asks, has your beneficiary ever been in the United States? This part was confusing to us. We marked, yes, he has been to the United States. Then the instructions say if your beneficiary is currently in the United States, then complete the following items 38A through H. So my fiance was not currently in the United States when we filled out this form, so we just put NA for 38A, B, C, etc. In 38E, it asks for his passport information. So even though we're putting NA for this section, we did include his passport information just to be thorough in case USCIS wanted it for any reason. For 38G, we put his country of issuance for the passport, which was United Kingdom, and then the associated expiration date. 39 asks if the beneficiary has any children. In our case, he does not have any children. If you answered yes, then you have to go through and add the children of the beneficiary, including their first name, last name, middle name, country of birth, date of birth, etc. As you scroll down, you get to question number 43. Question 43 asks, does this child reside with your beneficiary? Again, this doesn't apply to us, but if the child does not live with you, then you would put no, and then you would fill out this section here of the address where the child does reside. So you would add in information to question 44A through H. I'm going to scroll to the top of this page and get to this section here. This section talks about the address in the United States where your beneficiary intends to live once they come over to the States. In our case, the beneficiary is going to live with me. My fiance will live with me, so I'm going to add my address in here. And then at the bottom here for question number 46, I'm going to add my daytime telephone number as he does not have a U.S. telephone number. This next section here is going to talk about your beneficiary's physical address abroad. Again, this is a little bit like repetitive from a previous question, but it wants to know my beneficiary's address in London. So I'm going to add all of that information into here in question 47A through F. And then in question number 48, it would like to know his daytime telephone number. So we added that in, including the country code. Here it wants to know your beneficiary's name and address in his or her native alphabet. As my beneficiary is from the United Kingdom, this section does not apply, but it may apply to you, and then you would need to add all this information in here. In our case, we just put NA across every single box. The part 2 continued is information about your beneficiary. Question 51 says, is your fiancé related to you? We indicated no. For 52, this is not applicable to us as it asks to provide the nature and degree of the relationship, i.e. third cousin or maternal uncle. Question 53 is the most important question. It asks, have you and your fiancé met in person during the 2 years immediately before filing this petition? You have to indicate yes to this question. This question, if you answer anything else, will automatically disqualify you from the K-1 visa. So if you answered yes, you will have to attach a description of the circumstances under which you met in the last 2-year period. So if I scroll down to 54, this is where it wants to add the evidence, but this box is very, very small for us, wanting to add in additional evidence. So all we did is type in, please find attached a declaration letter of how we met included with this filing. So I will go through that at the very end in terms of what this attachment looks like, and we will attach it into the description as well. This section here talks about the international marriage broker information. If this is applicable to you, you're going to fill in this information here. My fiance and I did not meet through the services of an IMB, so for question 55, we are going to indicate no. If you indicate yes, you can then fill in this information on question 56, 57, etc. Just for general information, if you met your fiance through any sort of app like Tinder or Bumble or Hinge, you do not need to fill out this information. It is not an IMB. It is just a dating app. So now if I scroll up to the top here, this is a continuation, question 58 through 61 of the information of the international marriage broker. So we just put NA for everything. This section talks about the consular processing information. So the beneficiary is going to need to apply for a visa abroad at a U.S. embassy or consulate closest to them. In the case of my fiance, his closest one is going to be in London, United Kingdom. So I recommend looking up which U.S. embassy or U.S. consulate is closest to your fiance. Now we're up to part 3, other information. This information relates to criminal information, previous records, things of that nature. So the first question that we need to answer is, have you ever been subject to a temporary or permanent protection or a restraining order? This is a question for the American or the petitioner. So I have never been subject, so I'm going to put no. Then it wants to know, have you ever been arrested or convicted of any of the following crimes? Please read through this and then indicate yes or no. If you do indicate yes, you will need to add a lot of additional information into Part A, additional information, but just remember to be as honest as possible with USCIS. Part 2B is a continuation. In my case, I'm going to mark no, and Part 2C is also going to be no. This section here asks if you were ever arrested, like can you add additional information for 3A through 3C. 3A is saying I was acting in self-defense or I violated. Again, none of this was applicable, so we did not fill this out. For 4A, it wants to know if I've ever been arrested or cited or charged. I indicated no. And then if the answer to the previous question was yes, you can add additional information below. Now this final section here, this multiple filer waiver request form, I'm just going to go all the way down here to 5D and indicate not applicable, beneficiary is my spouse, or I am not a multiple filer. Now we move on to part 4, biographic information. So this just asks for my ethnicity. It asks for my race, my height, weight, eye color, and hair color. So we indicated all of that here. The petitioner's statement. The petitioner needs to indicate that they can read and understand English and that they have understood every single question. So I am going to check off box 1A that I can understand and read English. If you used an interpreter, then you're going to check off 1B and add in all the information here. For number 2, you might have used a preparer, but we did the form completely ourselves, so we did not indicate number 2 as a checked box, so we just added NA. The petitioner's contact information is going to be my contact information, so I'm going to add in my daytime phone number, my mobile number if different, and then my email address. Now there's the petitioner's declaration and certification. I'm going to scroll up here and you'll see that I have this highlighted in green here. This is very, very important. I am going to need to sign this form, but it cannot be a digital signature. It has to be a wet signature with black ink. So once you print off this form, even if you're very excited, just remember to sign in box 6A, petitioner's signature, as well as add a date in 6B. Now I scroll down here to part 6, which talks about the interpreter's contact information, certification, and signature. We did not use an interpreter, so we will add NA to every single box here just to be very comprehensive and complete in our form. But if this is applicable to you, you can add in the interpreter's last name, first name, and name of the organization, as well as their corresponding mailing address. Again, this is a continuation of the contact information for the interpreter, so you can add in their daytime phone number, mobile number, and email address if applicable, as well as have the interpreter sign and date the form. Part 7 is the contact information and signature of the person preparing this petition if it's other than the petitioner. In our case, I, the petitioner, prepared the form, so again, we're going to add in NA, NA, NA to all of these. The preparer's mailing address, we also had NA for all of these. We did the form completely ourselves, so we do not have a preparer. If you do, you would add that in here. And then the contact information in terms of the telephone number, mobile number, and email address. The preparer's statement was not applicable to us, but if you do have a preparer, they will help to fill out this section 7A and 7B. Finally, this is the preparer's certification, including their signature and the date of their signature. Now we move to Part 8. Part 8 is any additional information that basically overflowed from the previous question. So anything relating to previous addresses or previous employments, either yours or your beneficiaries, can be added in here. So for every single page, you're going to need to add in 1A, 1B, 1C, as in your last name, your first name, your middle name, any A number if applicable. And then for every single section that you're going to add on, you're going to need to describe the page number which you're adding on to, the part number, and then the item number. So for example, I wanted to add in another physical address of which I've lived in. So I'm going to go back to the section, and I had indicated that it's page number 2, part number 1, and item number 9A through 12B. So here's the physical address that I put in. These are all the fields that they were looking for in terms of the address, the state, the zip code, the country, and the date from which I lived there, and the date to which I lived there. You then continue to add on any other sections that you need to add on that overflowed from the original form. So for example, my beneficiary had another employer that they wanted to include in the last 5 years, so they went and added on page number 5, part number 2, and then the item number. And then they said, you know, they worked at this company, here is the address, and this is the date that they worked from and the date that they worked to. So you can continue adding on as many pages as you need to, but this is very important. At the bottom of every single page relating to section 8, you're going to need to date and sign every single page at the bottom here. So that's what I indicated down here. So this is the additional information that we provided for question 54. You can see at the top that it says Form I-129F Additional Information, page 8, part 2, question 54, and then we added in this description that says, describe the circumstances under which you met. We then added in all the additional fields that we have in part 8, such as the last name, first name, middle name, and a number. And then we wrote on the top here, proof of meeting in person, please find below the circumstances of our in-person meeting. So then we went on to describe this is how we met. Make sure to include very specific information such as the date, the place, the circumstances of your meeting, if you're able to provide any supporting information such as photos or copies of travel documents. Then in the line below, you'll make sure to sign and date every single page that you attach onto it. We have actually attached this form as downloadable in the description, so feel free to go there and download it and make it your own. We hope you found this video useful. This was just how to fill out the I-129F form itself, and the visa packet does require a lot more additional documents, and we'll create a video as to how to assemble the K-1 visa packet and everything to include. But hopefully, this helps you and saves you a lot of time and research as to filling out this form.